But if I can, I would like to go back to Tom on Tom, on your opinion and your take on what this is all going to mean for the market, for landlords, for tenants, for changes in rental yield and things. How do you see this going forward? Share with us sort of some of your pearls of wisdom.
Well, I think there are, there's going to be a whole myriad of changes in the market, and what we've done is we'll have just a quick look at some of the key ones. I think there are certain kind of things which are, if you like, elephants in the room in terms of how the market will react, and I think Karen's right that it's going to happen over a period of time. Obviously, the getting back into the office and transport and how comfortable people do that or are doing that is going to be one major thing, which, to date, in this kind of experiment, we don't know what the answer is going to be. We also don't know yet what is going to happen in terms of employment when the furlough scheme gets scaled down and is phased out. Which might have a profound effect on how many people are employed in office jobs, etc., etc. We just don't know that. And obviously, at the moment, the thing we do know is we're actually in a recession, a technical recession, and clearly that's going to continue. And again, trying to predict when we're coming out of that is difficult. And I think all of those things are going to have, their own impacts on the market anyway, and will evolve. I think in terms of the amount of space leased, again, what we've demonstrated in these drawings is that having fewer people in the office doesn't actually necessarily mean that you need less space because of social distancing. And again, that will evolve and will evolve partly as to how effective the business is. And how effective they are at switching to phasing staff coming in and out, who's going to be working at home and when. And obviously it's very interesting to hear how Karen's business is kind of rethinking all of that. Because, at the moment it doesn't necessarily mean less space is required. And obviously in terms of the market, leases, some leases don't break break clauses yet. So, those are the bullet dates when people have to make decisions, but at the moment, some businesses are in a holding pattern anyway. So
I think that's an important point, but it's not as though an awful lot of supply is going to come back to the market at any one time, for the reasons that some people are held in, but also that people might still need the space. It's just more of them will work from home. So
sure.
It may not have a dramatic increase on, the demand for office space ultimately.
It also very much depends on where you are as well. I mean, in London, central London, the vacancy rate is 4.9%, which is low, historically. And the effect of COVID-19 has been that quite a few developments have been delayed because people haven't been able to work on the sites, but also some developments have been shelved for the time being. So, the supply side of the equation, unless businesses shed significant amounts of space, which again is not a given at this stage, the supply side may stay relatively stable. Really, the issue is what's going to happen on the demand side and how people are going to cope. So I think going forward, looking at the demand for spaces and leases, I think there are a number of things that will change. I think new leases will have to incorporate more flexibility because I think tenants will insist on trying to minimize their risk. It's almost an existential threat, to a business if you're saddled with too much cost you can't get rid of. And again, I think there is a degree of, in the medium term where, this experiment will carry on. But these, I think, because of the flexibility, occupiers will use their break clauses increasingly for re-gears and things like that, for short term, while they're trying to progress their ideas on how their business is performing. In terms of, so then going hand in hand with that, I think is fitting out. And the way I see this is a couple of things. That shorter leases ultimately mean you'll have to write off fit out costs over a shorter period of time, which actually is an expensive business. So, and also, I think this will therefore progress the situation where landlords are offering enhanced space to tenants. So category A plus, where things like, you know, the cabling infrastructure and kitchens might already be in there. And this will kind of move forward into furniture solutions as well, where landlords will offer more fitted out space. But I mean, this will be good quality furniture that will get reused. And I think movable partitions and those sorts of solutions, so that you could move a partition around a space. You could also take it to your next building rather than fit it out, change all the M&E, and then have to reinstate at the end of the lease. So I think fundamentally things like that will start changing. But again, it very much depends on the size of a business. Whether they've got an FM team, all of that sort of thing. On rents and capital values, I think the combination of economic uncertainty, the potential for higher unemployment, and obviously the demand side of the equation looking pretty difficult in the kind of short, medium term, I think will have an effect on softening rents and increasing inducements for tenants to move. But obviously what we're talking about in terms of if a landlord is enhancing the space, it doesn't necessarily make it cheaper, because you're not going to do that unless you can get the money back on your investment. I think also it's worth saying that service charges will creep up because the additional cleaning, the additional facilities landlords will have to put into buildings. So I don't think any of this is really going to come at much of a reduced cost. But deals will get more competitive, I think, which obviously will have an effect on capital values. But again, this depends on what asset class you're talking about, where you're located, which market you're in. And obviously, where there is covenant risk and letting void risk, that will be increasingly repriced. And I think investors will look very closely on a building by building basis on how they're valuing. And again, I think some investors are kind of gearing up for there being some bargains in the market. And I guess, that is definitely possible. Part of that, I think, really depends on obviously the keenness or the necessity of an owner to sell a building, which probably means they're under pressure from the bank, particularly if they've got voids. I mean, one would hope that the banks actually are a bit more lenient than they have been in this regard, because I think that is a big issue. And bearing in mind, they were bailed out back in 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12. I think they ought to show a bit more forbearance. Finally, on serviced offices and flexible spaces, I think this is going to be really interesting, because everybody's seen the woes that WeWork and others have gone through. And we are definitely seeing some tenants coming out of serviced offices and going into lease space because they can control their environment, so their safety of their staff. And that actually, even in lockdown, we're doing a few deals in that regard. So I think this could work quite well for the smaller office side of the market, which has been hit quite hard by serviced offices. So I think serviced offices will still have a very significant role, because they'll also be used as swing space. I suspect that flexi spaces, where you have your private space within a multi-tenanted building, will prove more popular. I think the co-working model and being shoehorned in with lots of other people and having to share the kitchen and things like that, I think that is going to go through a hard time for some considerable time to come. So I think,
I'll just interject here to say, when we're talking about the flexible office market, there's quite a lot covered in a short space of time there. And we'll be running through this next week with a serviced office provider as well as a facilities manager, and talking about these challenges and opportunities in terms of not just what they're facing, but how should a tenant view that option. You've mentioned obviously that it might be that some people are moving out of serviced offices because of that element of control that they want back. It could be that other people are reassured that there is enough being done that they don't need that control, or that they can have eggs in more than one basket, or geographically around different parts of either London or the UK. So we'll go into that in a lot more detail, I think, in the next webinar, looking at the pros and cons and the strategy that could be involved there.